Hello and welcome to Emergence, Leading from the Field. My name is Artemis Evangelidi and I am your host. This podcast shines a light on courageous leaders from around the world, leaders who are shaping the future in bold and inspiring ways. Moving beyond the boardroom, we feature authentic conversations with guests, the change makers, the visionaries and innovators who are leading from experience, purpose and heart, from the field where transformation takes place. These are conversations with people who are listening deeply, acting boldly, and are doing their part to shape a more conscious and connected world. Our conversations will offer a rare glimpse into how our guests have overcome challenges while spearheading innovations that have enabled them to lead from the front lines. Be inspired as our guests share their journeys. Today, I am absolutely delighted to welcome all the way from London, Scott Robinson, to the show. Scott is a director at Deutsche Bank in the UK in the Transaction Policy and Advisory Group, a certified yoga and mindfulness teacher, and the founder of Yogi Banker, a platform supporting health, well-being, and conscious leadership in the financial sector. Combining decades of experience in finance with a deep commitment to inner development, Scott helps professionals manage stress, enhance resilience, and build sustainable well-being in high-pressure environments. His journey began in response to the demands of the industry and led to transformative practices that brought greater clarity, balance, and strength, both personally and professionally. Through yoga, mindfulness, and a relational approach to leadership, Scott now supports others in reconnecting with their values and cultivating a healthier, more compassionate culture in finance, one where performance and well-being go hand in hand. Scott, welcome. I'm delighted to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much, Artemis. It's a pleasure to be here.
You've had such an interesting journey. So more than 2 decades working in finance in London and I'm sure other places that you'll share with us, and to founding Yogi Banker and
Yes.
becoming a well-being advocate and teacher. It's a real shift for you. I think
Yes.
I'd love to start with your story and, share with our listeners. So you started off in finance. What was it that drew you into that world?
Yes, so I started in finance and still am in finance. It's really interesting. I guess my interest in finance started way back in school, where started in year 9 in secondary school in Sydney, and I started studying business. And I was very lucky. I guess if you look back at your life, there's pivotal moments or people who really guide or help you or start to shape your interests. And I had one excellent teacher who really allowed me to shine in the area of business and business studies, all the way to from doing well at school to becoming fourth in the state in business studies. And so I also studied economics. So I was always very interested in commerce, economics, finance, things like that. And so when I finished school, I was lucky enough to get a tertiary entrance ranking. That's what it was called back then, I guess. No, I think it's ATAR now in Sydney or Australia, where I was like, well, I can do lots of things with this. So I decided to do commerce and law because I thought, well, okay, if you want to get into banking or commerce, it's good to have a law degree. So I got a law degree and a commerce degree. And I started to work in my fourth year at law school as a part-time paralegal at then was Allen Hemsley, which is now Allen's. And I was in the finance and tax division as a paralegal. And so I guess I'm immersed in the world of finance from an Australian perspective. And so naturally speaking, that just led me on the path. And then I think again, connecting all the dots, there was a partner or a senior associate at the time who came from a prominent London law firm, Allen and Overy, in their derivatives group. And he connected me with a lady over there in the Allens, in Allen, A&O, Allen and Overy. And I got, I guess, a research assistant or a paralegal role with A&O for 1 year in London. And how it all started for me is that once I finished my law degree, Allen's gave me an offer to work as a graduate, but I went to the UK like a lot of other people just for a year initially or two. But for me, it turned out to be a 20 plus year career. So, it's just been a real, just like, and as the name of your podcast, just a real emergence. It's very I describe my career as very emergent. I'm just sort of following the path, following the flow, end up in derivatives and structured products in the heart of London, took me to New York and so forth. So, it's been a real just journey of me just following my instincts, my interests, and seeing where it all takes me.
I love that. It's amazing. And I think a lot of us who have worked overseas can relate to that. Initially it was, I'm going over for a couple of years. In my case, it turned out to be 16 years before returning, but it's an amazing experience. And I love how you have, you said you just kind of go with the flow, right? Whatever is emerging for you and you follow that. So at what point in all of that flow did yoga and mindfulness enter the story?
Yeah, so good question. So yoga and mindfulness came around 2011, 2012. But actually, before that, I had in a moment which again changed my life. It was like I was seeing a therapist at the time, 2006, and the therapist said, "How about would you like to try some Reiki?" Which is a kind of form of energy medicine or energy healing. And I lay down on this massage table, and she started to apply Reiki. And for those who don't know what Reiki is, it's a form of hands-on energy healing where there's a sense of transmission, or the healer applies a form of energy that's being transmitted from another source to the person, and it's very relaxing. And I had this feeling, I was lying on the massage table and I felt like I was floating in suspended animation. I was like, what's that? What was that? When you had this first, I wouldn't say it's out of body, but it was very much a different experience than your everyday experience. And there's like that just set me on the path. Like I want to experience that again, and I want to explore that more. And then I started to thought, where can I find Reiki? And I found a healer up in the north of London, whose name is Sunil. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. Who introduced me into things like meditation, but not just kind of meditation from a therapeutic perspective, more on the spiritual aspects. And I got talking to him, and I ended up learning Reiki 1 and 2 and so forth. And that just set me on the path. And then mindfulness came along, whereby I was suffering from some mental health challenges, and I came across, mindfulness-based stress reduction and so forth, and became interested in that path. And then yoga came along just before I started at Deutsche Bank back in 2012, where my partner at the time said, "Why don't you try yoga? It's meant to be really good for stress." So I went along to a local studio, and after a while, I just really, really loved the space. I loved the fact that it was that every Monday evening in a really weird place in a contemporary art gallery in contemporary art studio in Notting Hill, surrounded by all this weird and wonderful art. Here was me on a Monday evening doing yoga. And I guess I really liked the practice, and I wanted to become better and better. And then I just did yoga teacher training, and the rest is history. So it's a very natural, organic process whereby you find something you like and you enjoy it, and then you pursue that passion, and then that passion then ultimately becomes maybe a career. So it's quite interesting how things evolve. Mm.
Yeah. Well, it's the openness that you have. And I think
Mm.
that that's, something that a lot of adults uh, struggle with, the unlearning part of
Mm.
what I've done, what I've experienced, the path that I'm on, my career, my, roles and titles and so forth. And, they don't leave room for that openness and that spaciousness for something new to come in. So that unlearning to allow yourself to learn something new again is wonderful. I have to say, I think it was probably around, I'm not sure when you launched your Yogi Banker, brand and a whole image. But I recall I was still in Cyprus, and I recall doing the conscious leadership training, and those programs had already been rolled out, and we were doing that work. And I came across you on LinkedIn, and I thought, what, Yogi Banker? This is wild. This is out there. This is fantastic, and I've been following you for years because, and then eventually we connected and we had a chat online. But I just found it so wonderful that someone had put those two words together, and you were so brave to put it out into the world and say, actually, the two things can go hand in hand. It doesn't have to
Mm.
be one or the other. And a lot of people feel that, oh, I've found a calling, or I found something new. I want to do some energy work. I want to do some, meditation. I want to be a mindfulness teacher. I want to do yoga and be a yoga instructor. But I'm also a lawyer, accountant, doctor, physiotherapist. Like, what do I do? And I always say, you do it all. You don't have to give one
Mm.
up to do the other. So what has that experience been for you in terms of, you kind of laid that foundation? I dare say you were a bit of a trailblazer in stepping out and doing
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, good question, Artemis. So, I mean, Yogi Banker actually started as a blog. I was remember in Paris with my partner at the time, and she said we're walking on this street, and so what shall we call this blog? And Yogi Banker, yeah, that's it. And it was just like, okay, put those two things together. And initially, the blog started me anonymously because I was quite nervous about coming out. Like, who's this guy doing this yoga and banking thing? And then actually, I got my first break in a magazine called Balance. And I wrote an article for them about how the two can come together. And I was bringing a more spiritual aspect to it in terms of yoga acting as a kind of almost like a conscious agent to the financial sector and so forth. But you're absolutely right. I mean, I think the interesting thing about me and Yogi Banker is that you're absolutely right. I'm not the only Yogi Banker out there. I was the first, probably the one who's probably grabbed the brand and the hashtag and the URL and so forth. Because in my journey so far, I've met many Yogi Bankers on Instagram, and and they're like, "Oh my God, you're the first." But there are others out there, and I think this is it. In my travels and experiences, I go to retreats, I go to classes, and oh, you work at JP Morgan, you work at Deutsche Bank, well, and you do yoga. The thing is, because we're multifaceted, because we have different aspects to ourselves, we're not necessarily one or the other. And if you're brave enough just to soften the outside exterior and go into the interior and allow yourself to be vulnerable, even or just be even comfortable in these spaces, which for men particularly can be a little bit intimidating, very tends to be very female oriented, at least yoga is, and going into these spaces. But if you feel comfortable in your own skin, then suddenly this whole sense of new or you emerges because you feel so comfortable. And then you've got this other life, which deals with your other archetype or other side of your personality. And so then you've got this balance. And it's really wonderful. And then you start actually seeing, well, actually, the things that you like about finance are the things you like about yoga. Because if you're very technically minded, well, you bring that technical minded aspect to your yoga and your anatomy, physiology, sequencing, and so forth. So it's the same mind, but different interests.
That's fantastic.
Hmm.
So I guess you mentioned earlier that you've been through a period where you had some mental health issues and some challenges, and you were seeing a
Hmm.
therapist. And I think everyone can relate to that.
Hmm.
I've spoken previously many times and on the podcast and in live talks and in my articles about my own challenges with depression. The law is a very stressful place, and we know that. And as a young lawyer, trying to navigate all of those pressures and stresses, and one of the things that got me out, aside from psychology and the support networks and that are in place, was my mindfulness practice.
Hmm.
It was the opportunity for me to go deeper and deeper within, to find that reconnection that I was missing. How did I guess how has mindfulness and meditation and yoga, and you went all in and did your Reiki training as well? How has that helped you reconnect with yourself? How did that help you kind of navigate that experience? What was like a practical thing that you found it helped you achieve?
Yeah, I think it's the reconnection with the breath. You know,
Mm.
if I bring it down to one aspect, it's the breath and this felt sense of life force within. That's probably a little bit of quite a strong word, but it's a sense of coming home to yourself. And I think getting out of the all that mental chatter and the constant activity that goes on in the mind, just to come back to yourself, reconnect with your breath. Um, that in a very kind of reductionist way of thinking about therapy is for me been the key. John Kabat-Zinn, you might know, he's kind of one of the founders of modern mindfulness. always for each moment, each breath. It's a very kind of simplistic way of describing mindfulness, and mindfulness is much more than that. But really, on an individual level, if we can reduce our focus to that moment, and then there's a space. Oh, hang on, I'm those thoughts. I've got some space. I'm creating a little bit of, I'm softening. I'm actually just being. I'm moving from doing to being, and the yoga is the same too, because as much as I can do fancy asana, I actually really like the moments of just sitting. And you see that same commentary from teachers as they become older or more wise. It's the simple poses where you just become still, and it's that essence of coming back to yourself, that otherness within, is where I think these practices shine, because we live in such a go 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 dominant culture of doing, and actually, if you can just separate yourself at one point, one moment from all that, then everything just becomes that much easier in life.
Absolutely. It's
Mm.
amazing how we forget to breathe.
Mm.
And oftentimes if I'm teaching, and I'm sure you've experienced this as well, when
Mm.
you say, "Where's your breath? Have you
Mm.
been breathing, or have you been holding it? Like what's happening with you? What are you noticing?"
Yeah.
And people are often, "Oh my gosh, yeah, I haven't actually been breathing." It's such an interesting, simple practice, right? But the realization can be quite huge. So tell me a little bit about your colleagues and the people around you. Have they been leaning into these practices, watching you kind of take this road, and seeing how much it has benefited your own experience?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So for me, when I did my yoga teacher training, uh, I initially went there just because I wanted to do it. I was getting quite proficient at asana, and I wouldn't say I'm type A personality, but I'm just like, I want to do something. I want to do it to the next level. When you find something you like, so everyone said, "Oh, just do yoga teacher training for yourself, and you go deep and all that stuff." But something happened in this month in Bali where, I was in a shala by the beach, and it was quite tough, both physically and mentally. And I came out the other side. Oh, well, there's a teacher there. And so, but I wasn't ready to quit banking. I still quite like banking, and enjoy it. And obviously living in London isn't cheap. So it was naturally speaking, well, let's continue with banking. Let's bring the yoga to the banking world. And so I started off initially with a class every Friday morning with my colleagues. And they all loved that. There were people in my group had specific health issues and so forth. And it just really allowed them just to have some space, some working mothers and so forth. And then, it all went from there, whereby after a period of time, we were given an opportunity to introduce this across the bank. Initially, it was outside the bank, then we were allowed to bring it inside the bank. And when we started doing it inside the bank, it became a whole process called DB Yoga. And we started running classes and courses throughout the pandemic and prior to that. And still to this day, we're doing classes and courses. So and then the mindfulness came too on top as well. So it's been very organic. It's been very just, I don't know, very, very enjoyable, because I think I've had so much great feedback, whether it be during the pandemic, helping people grieve over the loss of loved ones, or just helping people just relax, or help people become more flexible, or whatever it is. It's so much variety and feedback, but I've helped so many people, and that's been so good, because most of the work I do for my yoga teaching is pro bono. We everything that is supports charity, and we've raised thousands of dollars for charity, the bank's charity of the year, and it's been a real joy. It's been a real joy.
I love that. That's it's so wonderful. And just picking up on some of the things that you've said, and I guess for our listeners also, they're probably putting the pieces together. Your approach to well-being is multifaceted. It's not
Mm.
just one thing. What would you say to someone who is, starting out on a journey of exploring what they need, what well-being looks like for them. What's a tip that you could give to someone from your own experience about how to look at well-being as something that is multi-pronged and, a holistic a holistic approach to well-being?
It's a good question. So my approach to well-being these days has changed, but influenced a little bit by some studies in transpersonal psychology, which is essentially bringing a more participatory approach to well-being. I like to call it transpersonal wellness, whereby you essentially find something that works for you. And we live in a very top-down, ego-dominated culture whereby world of influencers and quote-unquote experts who tell us how to do things, right? And often this doesn't work. Well, more often the case doesn't work. Maybe yoga doesn't work for people, or maybe mindfulness doesn't work for people. Maybe it's qigong, maybe it's tai chi, maybe it's Pilates, maybe it's something else. Find what works for you, and then play with it, be curious about it, and say okay, and then stick to it. Be committed every week in, week out, there, here or there. And then what happens is that through practice, you start to see the results. The results come over time, as opposed to initially. There's always this plateau period which everyone hits, and then that often people stop practicing. The key is to keep going through that. And it's a challenge, but I think the point being is, if you like what you do and you know your why, then you're more likely to continue to form a new habit. So really just be curious, and take it easy. It's one step at a time. I've tried lots of different things and skilled in a few areas now, but I think it's the key of being attentive to your own needs and doing it consistently.
Yeah, absolutely. So all of these practices, all of these trainings, how have they shaped you as a leader in your day job, like in your leadership role? How do you think that it has helped you kind of navigate that experience?
It's a really good question. There's two ways I would approach this. One, as you said at the beginning, having the courage to do what I've done has actually given me a sense of inner strength, because, doing something like yoga teacher training and then bringing it back into an organization in a traditional setting, yeah, it's not usual, but I think it's the strength that you gain on the mat gives you the strength off the mat. So you're in a difficult situation, you know that actually you've got a different aspect to yourself that you can draw upon. And then secondly speaking, if I really get into the heart of these practices, which I've tried to in many ways, it's this relational aspect that really binds it all together. If you look at what happens in yoga communities, it's this sense of coming together and practicing. In more traditional mindfulness circles, there's this sense of the sangha, the community of actually practicing together. And so within that, there's a field that's generated, and there are qualities within that field, which, and if I direct that attention towards others, then I try and bring, I use this word loosely, love and kindness and consideration for others. And then that's a quality that is easily transferable into another form of community, which are large organizations. And so I always bring like that quality to the way I communicate, the way I hold space, and the way I share with others and relate to others. And I think that's the key. That's the key, is that these values are easily transferred or transportable to other settings and other organizations, whereby ultimately speaking, what I think largely speaking is the key to success within organizations is the values and the culture. And so when we have a culture that fosters this sense of relationship, then ultimately organizations can thrive. And I think this is what I think I like to bring to my practices is what it means to be in relation to others.
And really, that's the foundation of conscious leadership, holding space in that way, and showing up with all the qualities that, we each hold, and the values that are important to us, and the things that drive us, and our passions and purpose. Our purpose ultimately is a culmination of all our talents and our gifts, and the things that bring us joy as we do them. So, taking that a little bit further, then I'm going to push you a little bit on this one.
Sure.
How do you see consciousness and leadership, I guess, intersecting in the world of business, of finance, of law, of all these, traditionally very analytical, A-type professions that you and I are both a part of, and also professions and industries that do have very high levels of stress and overwhelm and burnout?
Mm.
Can you see that kind of blending of consciousness and leadership playing out in real time?
Yeah, I see it in the area of well-being. I see more and more focus on well-being from a organizational perspective, and then looking at it from a strategic angle. And I think there that, when we move what the conversation about well-being from not just yoga classes and mindfulness classes as from a benefits perspective, as valuable as they are, um, to embedding that within an organization. And then what is consciousness? Consciousness ultimately is with, I always like go back to etymology. Consciousness means with knowing, right? And so what do we mean by that? What do we mean by that? Well, we bring the values to the way we lead, right? As I describe, it's being mindful of others, and when we create cultures which are compassionate and mindful, then we're bringing consciousness to those organizations, because the issue that we face is in the traditional corporate, I guess the traditional corporate mindset is focused purely on profit. I think more and more organizations today are waking up that yes, profit is important, um, but ultimately speaking, I need to look after my staff, and I have responsibility to stakeholders too. Now it's a challenge, and I'm not saying it's an easy thing to execute, but really, today's more and more organizations are realizing that things related to non-financial objectives are just as important as financial objectives, and regulators are also demanding the same too. So really consciousness and leadership are becoming more like intertwined, because there's so many ways which organizations are, I guess, deeply interconnected within the fabric of society, that they have roles and they have duties. And I think to that extent, you really people are just becoming more mindful of their impact upon the environment, and also the impact upon their stakeholders, including the staff.
Yeah, that's a really wonderful way to put it. Um, I guess, looking at all of these industries as kind of mini systems within the bigger systems that
Mm.
we're all a part of, what would be one thing that you would love to see shifting or changing in these broader systems? If you had a magic wand, what would be the one thing that you'd be changing today if you could?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for me, I would like to see I would like to see the way we account for, and you're already seeing this already, but it's still work in progress. The true cost of doing business is fully factored into how companies ultimately account for and report their financials. And I think because we're all collectively waking up, we are waking up, whether it be sustainability, diversity, inclusion, culture, conduct, and integrity. We're waking up that collectively speaking, we need to think of others in all those various dimensions. And so, what that means is basically that the way we see traditional um, accounting for financials within organizations through measures of profit and loss and balance sheet is only reflecting the financial side. It's not reflecting the non-financial side. And I know people in organizations who are looking to bring more value impact accounting and so forth. But I would like to see that more mainstream as opposed to just
Mm.
pure measures of profit and loss as the kind of the leader, or shall we say the thing that people sort of focus on exclusively. If we bring more balance, okay, there's the profit and loss, how it's traditionally accounted for or reported, and then there's the non-financial, which is sort of held in equal weight. Then you've got
Mm.
things to compare, because then you can see, well, okay, well, this organization is impacting X or this particular aspect in a particular way, but it's making so much money this way. What's equitable, what's fair, what's right in this circumstance, and then disclosure becomes a way of where you hold people to account, because disclosure is the binding measure whereby, ultimately speaking, organizations are held to account for. And so that we
Mm.
more transparency, I think, on the non-financial side.
Mm. Do you think mindfulness is a good tool to get people there, to start thinking in this way, or to start questioning their own decisions or actions?
Mindfulness, it's an interesting question. I've researched this and a lot and thought about it. Um, Mindfulness in of itself is only useful if you have the values, ethics, and wisdom which ultimately support the practice. And what I mean by that is that, ultimately speaking, unless mindfulness brings a more social and political aspect to the practice, then mindfulness can become a very individual reductionist type approach, where people just become very focused on what they're doing, that's what they do. So mindfulness has to be, in my view, about being a more relational and collective practice, by seeing clearly an impact upon others and that what I'm doing. And that's where you bring the more ethical side, and then you bring the whole wisdom side in terms of the interconnection and realization that we're all ultimately part of this uh, one community, global community. That's where mindfulness has is its greatest transformative value, where we can see clearly, as opposed to just simply going about our day mindlessly, if that's the right word.
Yeah.
Mm.
Mm. It's fascinating. There's a lot of research that's being undertaken at the moment around whether or not mindfulness can impact upon our morality and our ethics. Does it make us more moral? Does it make us more ethical in our decision making? And I'm really curious to see what the findings will be, because to this date we haven't been able to find. And as you said, it's because you turn inwards, and you're not really, you're forgetting that actually it's a relational exercise. It's something that you're supposed to use
Yeah.
to connect you to the greater whole, right? So it's a really interesting topic, and I love hearing everyone's experiences with it, because we all have a subjective experience with that as well, and how we use mindfulness in our practices. But okay, I want to get practical now. I want our listeners to get some Scott tools and tricks of the trade for those of our listeners who are in demanding jobs, or in finding themselves in industries that are quite challenging, and I know that a lot of our listeners are. What's one simple practice that you would recommend that they could start today to help them feel more grounded?
One simple practice. I think so. My practices on a daily basis comprise three things. I sit, I breathe, and I move. And so that's three things. And that normally takes place over about an hour every day, or there I try to. But not all of us have an hour, and sometimes I don't have an hour. Sometimes I might oversleep, or I don't have enough time. I need to get up early. So, but I always try and stop and pause. And I think this is the key, is that it's the stopping and pausing, um, and actually just connecting with the breath, because once we get that moment of aha, oh, I'm not my thoughts, or there's a little bit of space, and then you do that on a regular basis. And I'm not a big advocate for apps, but I do like that Insight Timers. It actually records your progress. It can track your progress.
Mm.
That keeps you accountable, right? Okay, I've done 10 days. Great. Let's do another 20 days. And then it goes from there. So actually just doing 5 minutes a day, and then doing it every morning, or every evening, wherever you can. Doing that consistently, and then over time, something will start to happen. There is a shift that goes on, because you are kind of rewiring neural networks and so forth. And then reconnecting with breath. Breath is, as I said earlier, breath is the one thing that that really helped me many years ago and still does. And that reconnection with breath is spirit. The word is really coming from that. So spiritus means breathe in I think it's in Greek or Latin. It's that sense of reconnecting to self. And once we reconnect to self, then suddenly, our life changes, or our perspective on life changes.
What's a simple breathing exercise you'd recommend? So you're sitting in your office, you've got back-to-back meetings, deadlines, you're about to go into, a meeting room with a client, you're starting to feel those stress levels elevate, you're getting a little bit flustered. What do you do?
Yeah, so there's lots of breathing techniques out there. Things like transformational breath, which is pretty radical. But what I would propose is simply just probably what is described as diaphragmatic or belly breathing. And it's actually more of a conscious breath whereby you direct breath into the abdomen. It's called diaphragmatic breathing because I guess it utilizes the diaphragm more extensively. The diaphragm is always used in every breath, but when you breathe more, whereby the diaphragm fully extends or fully contracts, where the diaphragm actually lowers towards the belly and the abdomen rises, and then you breathe out, the diaphragm returns. So you're just bringing more conscious awareness to your belly and breathing through the nose, and then actually allow the breath just to come in and out. Allow yourself just to be breathed, and that apparently has an effect upon the vagus nerve, which is the great nerve which connects the brain and the gut. So it's that's the one thing I always do is just conscious breathing is the one thing.
Thank you. So looking ahead, we're standing in the field, it's the emerging future. What's coming for Yogi Banker? What's the next phase?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'm really I'm in my end of my second year, about to start my third year of my master's. I'm doing a program in consciousness, spirituality, and transpersonal psychology, which has been really interesting because it's really brought this whole relational field out there, or to forefront in terms of my own interests. So for me, it's this balance between meeting individuals and their needs, because I understand that, there's a certain evolution that takes place from a consciousness perspective, and we have to meet people where they are. So I'm very much focused on the individual in terms of meeting people where they are and their needs. But I'm also interested in this whole relational field, as I keep stressing, and what does that mean from holding space? What does it mean the way we communicate? And so what I'm trying to do at the moment is really merge what I'm doing within the consciousness space with a more transformational aspect in finance. So my long-term vision is to bring more consciousness, more awareness, more connection to self and others within the financial sector, so that actually people can come together. People can come together. And when people come together, then actually that's where the transformation happens, beyond the individual. So that's, for me, it's the merging of the consciousness, transpersonal approaches to psychology, to well-being. I call it transpersonal wellness.
I love that. Well, I look forward to seeing how Yogi Banker evolves in this space because, we need it. And I'm sure that all the people who are working in finance who, can hear this and see this and have, you're holding space for them to see that this is possible, that you can still do this job and you can still be in this environment and, be the best that you can be and love what you're doing and have a passion for your work, but bringing this element of wellness and consciousness and, mindfulness and balance back
Mm.
into the industry. And if you think about, ultimately, when I reflect on money, for example, money is energy, right? So there's that relational energy and the energy of money, the exchange value of money and finances,
Mm.
and that exchange that we always have, and the ability to be able to link those two together, I think, is something quite remarkable. So I I invite anyone who is in this space to reach out and connect with Scott. First of all, just for the value of reading your LinkedIn posts, which are fantastic, but also to learn from you, to learn how you can bring these two things together and how you can do these things. And it's just such a wonderful thing to watch, and I've thoroughly enjoyed watching your journey over the past, I don't even know how many years, And I feel really chuffed that we've been able to connect and have these conversations in real time. So Scott, I thank you so much. It's been a wonderful, wonderful conversation. Thank you for your time and for your sharing. And I will definitely be putting all of the links in the podcast description for people to be able to reach out to you if they so wish.
Great. Thanks so much, Artemis. It's been a real pleasure to be here, and I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks, Scott.